Hey y'all, I am here to do a couple of completing the square questions with you. I'm going to start by doing an example, and then I'm going to pause the video and give you a chance to work one out, and then show you what the answer should be, and maybe we'll do that with two. All right, so we've been talking about this in class, and completing the square is a way to solve a quadratic equation, and there is a pretty good process that we have outlined to help you think through that. So refer to your note sheet as we go through these examples so you can see how this is working. All right, the first step when you're completing the square is you want to take half. Ooh, my bad, that's not the first step. We want to move the constant to the other side. We'll take half in a minute. All right, so if we move the constant, which is 48, to the other side, we're going to have a negative 48. And what we're going to do is find a value here that will complete the square. And how you go about this now we get to do it, is we're going to divide the b coefficient of x, divide it by 2. That gives you 7. And then we're going to square that result. So 7 squared is 49. That number is what we are adding to both sides, and we always add no matter what. No matter what. So you will never put a negative number in these boxes, ever. Now what we want to do is we want to factor the left-hand side. So we want to figure out what two factors of 49 add to give you 14. And that would be a positive 7 and a positive 7. Now, in completing the square, this should always happen because what we want to do is be able to write our answer as a binomial squared. So you should expect to have identical factors every time you get to this step, and then you want to write them as that factor squared. All right, you'll also notice maybe that the number we got when we took half also just so happens to be the number that ends up in our factors. So that is no coincidence. That will also happen every time. All right, we factored the left. Now what we want to do is just simplify on the right, and the negative 48 plus 49 is 1. And we're done with that part. So when you get here, you're going to use the square root method, and that's also a method we have talked about to solve quadratic equations. So this completing the square method actually works you up to use a former method we have already talked about. The square root method says you want to isolate your squared term, which is x plus 7, and then you want to square root both sides. So the square and the square root cancel. Everything under the radical comes out. Automatically, when we square root both sides, we're going to have a plus or minus version of whatever this radical is, and the square root of 1 is just 1. Now we want to move over 7, and we have plus or minus 1 minus 7. And we don't want to leave it like that because there are actually two solutions here. They're just disguised. One of them says x can be a positive 1 minus 7, and the other one says that x can be a negative 1 minus 7. So don't leave your answers unsimplified if you can simplify them. 1 minus 7 will be negative 6, and negative 1 minus 7 will be negative 8. So there are your two answers for this quadratic equation. We used completing the square method, and I'm going to give you one to try. And we want to try this one here, right? X squared minus 6x minus 49 equals 0. Okay, so I want you to pause the video, take a minute to solve that, and then we'll come back. All right, we're ready to see what happened to this equation. Now, this one was a little bit different because we had some different signs on our x term, and also our right-hand side of our equation was not a nice square root. And if that happens, that is okay. That just means that your answer will maybe have a radical in it, okay? So when you take half of 6, after you've moved 49 over, take half of 6, you get 3, you square it, that's 9. So we add 9 to both sides. Then this part right here might be a tad bit different because when you factor the factors of 9, that would add to give you a -6. Remember, those are negative numbers you need. Another thing that some of you have also noticed is that when you factor and your x term is negative, both of your factors have negatives in them as well. So that's another good observation that y'all have made. When you go to square root both sides here, don't forget your plus or minus. When you move that 3 over, one thing you always want to double check is that you can't reduce the square root of 58, and you can't. So you will just leave it that, square root of 58, and then you will just add your 3 on there. So your two different solutions would be a positive square root 58 plus 3 or a negative square root 58 plus 3. All right, we're going to pause the video one more time. I'm going to give you one more question to work through, and then we'll see what the answer is. All righty, here's you one more equation I want you to solve by completing the square. I'll give you a chance to work that out, so pause the video, and then we'll come back and we'll see how you did. Okie dokie, let's see how you did. This one is another different kind of completing the square question. I wanted to give you a chance to try it to see what would happen on your own, and I hope you realize that you're getting an imaginary number in the solution. And the reason is that when you move your constant over to the right-hand side, we get a negative number. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to have an I in your solution, but it does mean that the potential is there. And it just so happens that that is what happened because we get a -16 on the right-hand side. So if your number on the right-hand side of your equation is negative, you can be assured that when you get ready to do the square root, you need to take that into account, and you're going to have an I in your answer. All right? Then when you get to this step, remember it's a plus or minus, move your 1 over, and then here is what your answer would look like with those two answers kind of intertwined. If you want to unpack those, it would look like 4i plus 1 and a negative 4i plus 1. Or some of you like to write it in standard form, which means the real number's first and then the imaginary number is second, and that's fine. So either way, that's what it would look like. I hope this helps, and let me know if you got any questions.